Welcome back to U.S. Command Insight. Stop whatever you are doing because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. What happened in the last 48 hours represents the most catastrophic single strategic event in the history of the modern world. An event so consequential, so irreversible, and so devastating in its implications that every government on Earth is currently in emergency session trying to process what it means and finding no comfortable answer. Russia has transferred 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat nuclear missiles to Iran. 1,000. Say that number out loud and let it occupy the full space it deserves. Not a squadron, not a regiment, 1,000 of the most destructive weapons ever manufactured by human civilization, each one carrying a payload capable of erasing a country the size of France from the map, each one traveling at hypersonic velocity along trajectories that no defense system on Earth was designed to intercept, each one now sitting inside hardened Iranian launch facilities pointed outward at a world that has just run out of time to pretend the old rules still apply. The RS-28 Sarmat. NATO calls it Satan II. The name is not marketing. It is a description with a range of 18,000 kilometers, a payload capacity of up to 15 independently targetable nuclear warheads per missile, and a flight profile that can approach its targets from any direction, including over the South Pole, bypassing every early warning radar that the United States and NATO have spent decades positioning along the northern approaches. The Sarmat was already the most terrifying weapon system in the Russian strategic arsenal. It was designed specifically to defeat American missile defense. It was built with the explicit purpose of ensuring that nothing the United States deploys, no interceptor, no laser system, no classified next-generation capability can prevent it from reaching its designated target. And Russia just gave 1,000 of them to Iran. Let us talk about what 1,000 Sarmat missiles actually means in operational terms, because the number needs to be translated into strategic reality before its full weight can be understood. The United States currently maintains approximately 1,500 deployed strategic nuclear warheads across its entire nuclear triad: land-based missiles, submarine launch missiles, and nuclear-capable bombers combined. 1,000 Sarmat missiles, each carrying up to 15 independently targetable warheads, represents a theoretical maximum delivery capacity of 15,000 nuclear warheads. Iran has just received a nuclear arsenal that in raw delivery capacity exceeds the entire American strategic nuclear force by a factor of 10. Israel issued its response within 6 hours of transfer confirmation, a single statement, 11 words. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. Behind that statement, behind those 11 words delivered in the controlled, flat tone of a government that has just looked into the abyss, is the most agonizing strategic calculation any Israeli leadership has ever been forced to make. Because Israel's own nuclear arsenal, formidable by regional standards and sufficient to guarantee the Samson option against any previous version of Iranian military power, is now facing a counterpart that outweighs it by an order of magnitude that makes the term balance meaningless. Washington received the transfer confirmation at 3:14 inches the morning. The president was woken immediately. The National Security Council was fully assembled within 20 minutes. And for the first time in the history of American crisis management, for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, put the world on the edge of annihilation. the assembled leadership of the most powerful nation on earth sat in a room together and could not identify a single option that did not carry the realistic possibility of ending human civilization as a functioning enterprise. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this moment. How did Russia execute a transfer of 1,000 Sarmat missiles without triggering a Western response? What does the Sarmat's technical architecture mean for every defense system that Israel and the United States have spent decades and trillions of dollars building? What is behind Israel's 48-hour ultimatum? And is it a genuine red line or the last desperate gesture of a government that has run out of real options? What does Washington do when deterrence itself has been deterred? And what does a world with 1,000 Russian nuclear missiles in Iranian hands mean for the global order, for the non-proliferation framework, and for the basic assumption that tomorrow will look anything like today? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but the truth, however brutal, is the only thing worth saying. 3 questions will drive everything that follows. First, how did Moscow execute the largest single nuclear weapons transfer in human history without triggering a Western interdiction response? And what does that failure reveal about the actual limits of American global intelligence dominance? Second, what does the RS-28 Sarmat's technical reality mean for Israeli and American defense architecture? And is there any intercept capability on Earth that can realistically engage it at scale? Third, with Israel's 8-hour clock now running and Washington holding no clean military option, is there any path through this crisis that does not end in nuclear exchange? And if there is, who has the courage and the clarity to walk it? If this channel has been the place where you come when you need analysis that goes deeper than the headlines, sharper than the official narrative, and more honest than anything, the mainstream defense media is willing to say, this is the moment to make that relationship permanent. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, share this video immediately with everyone in your network who needs to understand what is happening, and drop your most serious assessment in the comments. Because tonight, this conversation matters more than it ever has before. Part 1, the transfer. How Russia armed Iran with Satan II and why. The West never saw it coming. The transfer of 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat missiles from Russia to Iran did not happen through the kind of covert logistics operation that Western intelligence agencies are trained to detect and interdict. It happened through something far more audacious and far more difficult to counter a state-to-state strategic decision made at the highest level of Russian government, executed through official military channels and completed before Washington could formulate a response capable of stopping it. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the strategic logic that drove Moscow to this decision. Because the transfer of 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs to a regional power is not an action that any government takes without a calculation. Extraordinary deliberateness. Vladimir Putin does not make decisions of this magnitude impulsively. Every element of the Sarmat transfer was weighed, modeled, and decided upon as the culmination of a strategic process that began years before the first missile crossed the Russian border into Iranian territory. The foundation of that process was the recognition crystallizing in Moscow across the past 3 years of sustained Western pressure over Ukraine that the existing rules-based international order, as administered by Washington, had become an instrument of permanent Russian strategic disadvantage. Every tool of Western pressure had been deployed against Russia simultaneously. Financial sanctions of unprecedented scope, technology export controls targeting Russia's defense industrial base weapons transfers to Ukraine at a scale that prolonged the conflict indefinitely, diplomatic isolation across Western-aligned international institutions. Russia's response to this pressure had been patient and methodical, building alternative financial architecture, deepening energy relationships with non-Western partners, expanding the SEO and BRICS frameworks into genuine strategic alternatives to Western-dominated institutions, and most consequentially, identifying the single action that would most decisively reshape the global strategic environment in Russia. Favor while remaining below the threshold of direct military confrontation with NATO? The answer was Iran. A nuclear-armed Iran, or more precisely, an Iran possessing the world's most advanced nuclear delivery systems, transforms the Middle Eastern strategic environment in ways that permanently consume American strategic attention, permanently tie down American military resources, and permanently degrade American credibility as the guarantor of regional security. Every percentage point of American strategic capacity absorbed by a nuclear-capable Iran is a percentage point unavailable for pressure on Russia. Every ally that loses confidence in American security guarantees due to Washington's failure to prevent the Iranian acquisition is an ally that Moscow can cultivate as an alternative partner. The transfer was therefore not an impulsive escalation. It was a calculated strategic investment. The most consequential single move in Moscow's long-term campaign to reshape the global order away from American unipolarity. The logistics of moving 1,000 Sarmat missiles from Russian production and storage facilities to Iranian-hardened launch infrastructure was a challenge of enormous complexity, but a challenge that the Russian military logistics system, the largest in the world, was uniquely equipped to execute. The transfer ran through a combination of rail transport across Russian territory to the Caspian Sea coast, maritime transfer across the Caspian in Russian military vessels operating in waters, where no Western surveillance asset has meaningful access, and final overland delivery through Iranian territory to harden underground facilities across multiple provinces. The entire operation was conducted under the cover of a series of large-scale Russian military exercises in the Southern Military District exercises, whose satellite signatures provided plausible deniability for the movement of heavy strategic equipment across the relevant geographic area. Western intelligence satellites saw large military movements. They assessed them as exercise-related. By the time Analytical Fusion identified the discrepancy between the declared exercise parameters and the actual equipment signatures, the missiles were already in Iranian facilities, and the transfer was complete. The failure of Western intelligence to interdict this operation is not primarily a collection failure. It is a decision-making failure. The collection assets were there. The signals were present. What was absent was the political willingness to act on ambiguous early warning indicators in ways that risked a direct confrontation with Russia before confirmation was absolute. And by the time confirmation was absolute, the window for interdiction had closed. This is the intelligence paradox that authoritarian systems exploit against democratic ones. Democratic governments require a higher standard of certainty before taking high-risk action than authoritarian governments require before completing high-risk operations. Russia acted. Washington deliberated. The missiles are in Iran. The Iranian reception infrastructure, the hardened underground launch facilities, the command and control architecture, the technical personnel trained in Sarmat operations have been prepared across a multi-year program whose full scope Western intelligence had not accurately assessed Iranian and Russian technical teams had been working together at classified facilities for years, building the receiving architecture in advance of the transfer. When the missiles arrived, Iran was ready to receive them, integrate them, and place them on operational alert within a timeline measured in days rather than months. Part 2, Satan II, the weapon that makes every defense system a relic. The RS-28 Sarmat earned its NATO designation, Satan II, through a process of sober technical assessment by analysts who do not use dramatic language lightly. Understanding why this weapon is categorically different from everything that has previously defined the nuclear threat environment requires examining it across 5 dimensions: throw weight, warhead capacity, range, geometry, penetration aids, and the fundamental impossibility of intercept at scale. Begin with throw weight, the payload capacity that the missile can deliver to its target. The RS-28 Sarmat carries a throw weight of approximately 10 metric tons. This is not a number to pass over quickly. 10 metric tons of deliverable payload capacity means that a single Sarmat can carry combinations of warheads, decoys, and penetration aids that overwhelm any intercept system simultaneously. The standard configuration carries between 10 and 15 independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MVs, each capable of being directed to a separate target within a strike zone. A single Sarmat launch against Israel could simultaneously target Tel Aviv, Haifa, Bir, Cheva, the Diona nuclear facility, Nevatim Air Base, and every other strategically significant node in Israeli territory, with warheads remaining for the command bunkers beneath each of them. One missile, one launch, every significant target in a country the size of New Jersey, simultaneously. Now multiply that by 1,000. The warhead yield options available for Sarmat reentry vehicles range from tactical to city-destroying strategic configurations. Russian doctrine allows for flexible payload selection based on target requirements, meaning that Iran now possesses the option to calibrate its nuclear response anywhere on a spectrum, from surgical military strikes to civilization-ending exchanges. This flexibility is itself a strategic asset, an adversary that can threaten any point on that spectrum simultaneously forces its opponent to plan against all of them simultaneously, an impossible defensive task. The range geometry of the Sarmat is where the weapon's most revolutionary characteristic becomes apparent. With an operational range of 18,000 kilometers, the Sarmat can reach any point on Earth from any launch position within Iranian territory. But range alone does not capture the full significance of its flight geometry. The Sarmat was specifically designed to approach its targets via trajectories that bypass the early warning and intercept architecture that the United States and its allies have constructed across decades of Cold War and post-Cold War investment. American Missile Defense Architecture, THAAD, Aegis, the ground-based mid-course defense system in Alaska and California, was designed around the assumption that Russian or Chinese ICBMs would approach the continental United States via the shortest available flight path, which runs over the North Pole. Decades of early warning, radar, investment, interceptor positioning, and command architecture were built around that northern approach corridor assumption. The Sarmat can fly over the South Pole. It can approach the United States and Israel from directions for which no early warning radar coverage exists, along trajectories for which no interceptor has been positioned using flight paths that the entire American missile defense architecture was never designed to address. The weapon was built specifically to make American missile defense irrelevant against targets in the Middle East. the trajectory options are even more varied, and the early warning timeline even more compressed. The penetration aids package carried by each Sarmat reentry vehicle stack compounds the intercept impossibility. Alongside its nuclear warheads, each SART carries a suite of decoys objects designed to mimic the radar signature of real warheads, along with electronic jamming systems and maneuvering reentry vehicles that execute evasive maneuvers in the terminal phase. An intercept system attempting to engage an incoming Sarmat strike package must simultaneously discriminate between real warheads and decoys, track maneuvering objects, executing hypersonic lateral displacement, and execute intercepts against targets moving faster than any interceptor currently deployed in the theater was designed to engage. The mathematics of intercept against this threat profile are not unfavorable. They are impossible. Against a single Sarmat launch, an intercept system might engage some of the decoys and achieve nothing. Against a salvo of 10 Sarmats carrying a combined package of 150 warheads and several hundred decoys, every intercept system in the theater would be saturated before the first real warhead was engaged. Against 10,000 Sarmats, the full transferred inventory now sitting in Iranian facilities. The concept of missile defense ceases to have operational meaning. You cannot intercept 1,000 ICBMs. No system built, no system currently in development, no system that exists in the classified programs of the American defense establishment can intercept 1,000 simultaneously launched ICBMs. The physics do not allow it. The mathematics do not allow it. The timeline does not allow it. Israel's Arrow 3 system, its highest tier ballistic missile defense, designed for exo-atmospheric intercept of long-range threats, has a total deployed interceptor inventory that could engage a fraction of a single Sarmat warhead package. Against 1,000 Sarmats, Arrow 3 is not a defense. It is a gesture. Iran now possesses a nuclear strike capability that is, for practical purposes, unlimited in its ability to reach and destroy any target on Earth. The strategic implications of that reality have no modern precedent outside the relationship between the United States and Russia at the height of the Cold War. And unlike the Cold War, where mutually assured destruction created a stable, if terrifying, equilibrium between two superpowers with roughly comparable arsenals, the current situation involves a asymmetry that stability theory was never designed to manage. Part 3, the 48, our clock, Israel's ultimatum, and the logic of desperation. 11 words. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. Israel's public ultimatum delivered through official government channels within 6 hours of transfer confirmation is simultaneously the most understandable and the most strategically problematic response available to a government facing existential threat. Understandable because doing nothing in the face of 1,000 nuclear missiles pointed at your cities is politically and psychologically impossible for any government. Problematic because the ultimatum creates a crisis timeline that compresses every subsequent decision into a window so narrow that rational deliberation becomes nearly impossible. Let us examine what stand down actually means in operational terms, because the ambiguity of the demand is itself revealing of the impossible position Israel occupies. Iran cannot return 1,000 Sarmat missiles to Russia in 48 hours. The physical logistics of such a reversal, the transportation infrastructure, the disassembly requirements, the verification mechanisms would require months under optimal conditions. Stand down, therefore, means something different from transfer reversal. It means, at minimum, a commitment to remove the missiles from operational alert status subject to verification. At maximum, it means a commitment to Iranian strategic disarmament that no Iranian government could accept without political collapse. Iran's response to the ultimatum came within 3 hours. It was delivered not through diplomatic channels, but through a public statement from the Supreme Leader's office, a deliberate choice of forum that signaled the answer before the words were read. The statement was brief. Iran recognized no ultimatum from any party. Iran's strategic deterrent was a matter of national sovereignty. Any military action against Iranian territory would be met with a response calibrated to eliminate the source of the threat. The 48-hour clock is running, and everyone watching it in Tel Aviv, in Washington, in Moscow, in Beijing, and every capital with a meaningful stake in the outcome understands that when it expires, the decision Israel faces has no good branch. If Israel acts militarily against Iranian Sarmat facilities before the clock expires, it is initiating a strike against 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs in hardened underground facilities dispersed across Iranian territory. The strike package required to achieve meaningful degradation of that target set, even assuming perfect intelligence on facility locations, which Israel does not have, would require hundreds of aircraft sorties over days of sustained operations. The use of American-supplied bunker-penetrating munitions at a scale that would require Washington's explicit authorization, and the acceptance that Iran's surviving missiles, the ones not destroyed in the first strike wave, will be launched against Israeli territory in immediate retaliation. The survivability calculation for Iran's Sarmat force against the first strike is overwhelmingly favorable to Iran. Underground hardened facilities built to Russian military engineering standards, the same standards that protected Soviet strategic missiles through decades of American targeting, can survive everything in Israel's conventional arsenal. Destroying them requires nuclear weapons. And Israel using nuclear weapons against Iran triggers a response threshold that pulls every nuclear power on Earth into an emergency response posture simultaneously. If Israel does not act when the clock expires and the ultimatum passes without military follow-through, the implications extend far beyond a single moment of restraint. In strategic terms, red lines are only as credible as the willingness to enforce them. If a declared threshold is crossed without consequence, adversaries may reassess the reliability of future warnings. Over time, this can influence how deterrence is perceived, not just in Israel's immediate region, but across a broader geopolitical landscape. In such a scenario, external observers and regional actors may update their assumptions about Israel's strategic posture. The perception could emerge that pressure, timing, and circumstances can influence the enforcement of stated red lines. Whether or not that perception is accurate, the interpretation itself becomes part of the strategic environment. Deterrence is not only about capability, but also about credibility, and credibility is shaped as much by perception as by action. At the same time, any ultimatum carries inherent costs. The act of issuing a deadline signals urgency and intent, but it also creates expectations. If those expectations are not met, the issuing party may face questions about resolve, timing, and strategic calculation. From this perspective, the ultimatum itself becomes a double-edged instrument intended to project strength, yet also exposing constraints if not backed by action. In parallel, external responses, particularly from major global powers, play a significant role in shaping the crisis environment. Statements emphasizing de-escalation and diplomatic engagement are typical in moments of heightened tension. Such responses often aim to reduce immediate risks rather than endorse specific courses of action. However, the absence of explicit support for military measures may be interpreted by some as a signal of limited willingness to intervene directly in a rapidly evolving crisis. Within strategic studies, the concept of deterrence failure refers to situations where the threat of retaliation no longer prevents an adversary from taking actions previously deemed unacceptable. Modern deterrence frameworks have historically relied on a combination of military capability, alliance commitments, and credible signaling to maintain stability. When an action occurs that was widely considered beyond acceptable thresholds, analysts often reassess whether existing deterrence structures remain effective under new conditions. In such moments, policymakers and analysts are faced with evaluating a limited set of options, each carrying significant risks. Direct military confrontation between major powers remains one of the most dangerous possibilities in international relations, and avoiding escalation between nuclear-armed states has long been a central objective of strategic doctrine. As a result, certain responses are constrained not by lack of capability alone, but by the potential consequences they could trigger. Sanctions and economic measures, while historically significant tools of pressure, may have diminishing marginal effects if a target state has already adapted to extensive restrictions. Similarly, military options against heavily defended or dispersed strategic assets present operational and escalation challenges that complicate planning. Diplomatic engagement, on the other hand, depends on mutual willingness to negotiate, often requiring compromises that may be difficult to reconcile with domestic political constraints or perceived strategic value. When viewed collectively, these constraints highlight the complexity of high-stakes international crises. Decision makers must weigh not only immediate tactical outcomes, but also long-term strategic implications, alliance dynamics, and the risk of unintended escalation. In environments characterized by uncertainty and compressed timelines, even small miscalculations can have outsized consequences. Beyond the immediate crisis, broader structural questions come into focus. The post-World War II international system has long been shaped by two foundational elements: the distribution of military power and the framework of nuclear non-proliferation. These systems were designed to limit the spread of the most destructive weapons and to maintain a balance of deterrence among recognized nuclear states. However, when new forms of capability transfer or unconventional strategic relationships emerge, they can challenge the assumptions underlying these frameworks. Traditional non-proliferation mechanisms were not designed to address scenarios in which advanced delivery systems might be transferred between states in ways that bypass development constraints. As a result, such developments, whether hypothetical or real, prompt discussions about whether existing institutions remain adequate for contemporary challenges. At a global level, major powers continuously monitor shifts in strategic balance and interpret them in the context of their own security interests. Perceptions of deterrence, effectiveness, influence not only immediate responses, but also long-term planning in regions such as East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Strategic decisions made by one actor can therefore have cascading effects, shaping calculations across multiple theaters simultaneously. Regional actors, particularly those in proximity to areas of tension, may also reassess their security postures in response to perceived changes in the balance of power. Energy dependencies, economic partnerships, military alliances, and historical rivalries all factor into how states interpret and respond to evolving circumstances. In this way, a single development can influence a wide network of interconnected strategic relationships. Over time, the cumulative effect of such shifts may contribute to a transition toward a more multipolar international system, where influence is distributed among several major powers, rather than concentrated in one dominant actor. This transition, if it occurs, is unlikely to be linear or stable. Instead, it may involve periods of adjustment, uncertainty, and recalibration as states adapt to new realities. Ultimately, the broader significance of this type of scenario lies not in any single claim, but in the questions it raises about deterrence, credibility, and global stability. How states communicate resolve, how they interpret signals, and how they balance risk against restraint are central to understanding modern geopolitics. In a complex and interconnected world, maintaining stability depends not only on capability, but also on clarity, consistency, and careful judgment under pressure.